this is going to be a weird one to talk about. The Doctor Who the movie, which, yes, that's what it's called, since this was only ever shown on Fox and the BBC under the title just Doctor Who, is a very weird beast that came out in the middle of the Great Hiatus, which, by the way, I became a fan smack dab in the middle of this. And when I found out this existed, I really wanted to see it. Only one problem. There wasn't a Fox affiliate in my area at the time. Yeah, believe it or not, Fox wasn't the force in media that it came to be in the mid-90s. There were a lot of areas in the United States where Fox just didn't have any coverage. And so I had to engage in a bunch of tape trading to eventually see a copy of this sometime in the year 2000, when I finally managed to trade tapes around, because there was a lot of Doctor Who material you couldn't get a hold of in the days before the internet. So the hiatus not only hurt because there was no new Doctor Who and you had just discovered this weird sci-fi show that had become your favorite thing if you were a Who fan, and there weren't any new episodes to watch, but it also was a thing of getting to see the existing episodes was a pain. I mean, this was before Amazon was selling VHS tapes or DVDs online, and Doctor Who wouldn't come to DVD until, I believe, 2002. I'm going from my memory of when I first saw a disc in Suncoast. So you had to go to a store, you had to go to a video store an hour drive away, and hope that in their sci-fi section they had some tapes of this obscure show stuck away. Or you could do what I did, which is join a series of Doctor Who message board, befriend people on there, make copies of the Doctor Who episodes you had taped off of PBS, hope somebody else needed that copy, and they had a copy of, and they could make a copy of a recording they had off of PBS or somewhere that, of episodes you didn't have, trade them, get extra copies, trade those, and eventually work your way up to seeing this thing. And boy, at the time, I know myself and a lot of fans were of two minds. On the one hand, it was really cool to see Doctor Who done with a budget. Again, this was long before the show came back and the BBC gave it a budget and the show was using CGI and all these other modern tricks to make itself look slicker. So that was really cool. On the other hand, well, at the time watching it, you could tell it was a show with two masters. And a lot of fans were really harsh to it, myself included. I thought this was absolutely the worst thing I had ever seen. And I did eventually buy it on DVD for a completionist's sake, but again, in the tradition of Doctor Who being hard to be a fan of at that time, was the caveat that you had to get a multi-region DVD player, or a DVD player that you could hack to make it multi-region, and you then had to import the DVD. Yeah, despite the fact that this premiered on the Fox network in the USA, you had to get the DVD from the UK because there is some sort of stupid rights issue that keeps it from getting a home video release in the US. I mean, to me, this is why the rights holding issues and of copyright. I'm not saying copyright is a bad thing, since it enables the people creating art to make a living, but when it goes so far that you cannot make the product available in the country whose audience it was originally produced for, I think maybe, just maybe, copyright laws are starting to get a little bit ridiculous. And even today, as far as I can tell, that DVD is out of print. So now, if you want to see this thing, since it's not available on any streaming service in the US due to those same rights issues, there's only one way you can see it now easily, and that is to become a pirate king. And it is a glorious thing to be a pirate king. Now, it's been about 20 years since I watched this, so I just decided to sit down and watch it and see if it really was the worst thing that had been done with Doctor Who, as was my initial impression. Right off the bat, it wasn't encouraging. I forgot this opened up with a stupid narration, which, give credit to Paul McGann, who plays the 8th Doctor in this, which this is his only screen appearance until the 50th anniversary. He went from 1996 to 2013 with only one screen appearance, and that makes him the most shafted Doctor in history. Fortunately, like the second most shafted Doctor in history, Colin Baker, he got to make up for it with the Big Finish audios, which, if you haven't heard them and you're a Doctor Who fan, get a hold of them somehow, because it sort of makes up for the injustice of this movie being all he had for nearly 20 years. But it opens up with a narration about the Master being caught and tried on the planet Skyro for his crimes, and then making a last request that the Doctor take his remains back to Gallifrey, because he was at the end of his regeneration cycle. Now, some people may think that it was the Time Lords and they just happened to catch him on Skybro, but no. Despite the fact that there seemed to have been rights issues that kept them from showing a Dalek on screen, or even saying the word Dalek, it's clear that the writers intended that it was the Daleks doing this, because you hear Dalek voices saying "exterminate" as the Master is executed. Now, you may already have some questions if you're a Doctor Who fan. I mean, if you're not a Doctor Who fan, you're already lost. The fact is that this was intended as a backdoor pilot because Fox was considering picking up Doctor Who as a science fiction series. As I understand it, Fox was sort of surprised by just how successful the X-Files had become, and they were looking for some other sci-fi franchise to add to their lineup. And this was one of them, so this TV movie, which had started out as an actual movie at Universal, then got picked up, and this was a lot of them. This would have been a lot of viewers' first ever exposure to Doctor Who. So a lot of fans have wondered if it was really the smartest idea to just throw all this lore without any explanation at new viewers. But here's the problem a lot of fans had with it, and I still have with it to this day. First, since when do Daleks conduct trials? I mean, maybe they're not emotionless, so maybe they'd like to torment their victims by subjecting them to some sort of show trial with a predetermined outcome, maybe? I don't know, but it says that they read off a list of his crimes, which again, what? If there's anyone that can outdo the Master in a list of crimes, it's the Daleks. What is going on here? When I first saw this, the only way I could rationalize this was maybe some of the human factor Daleks from the old, lost Second Doctor serial, The Evil of the Daleks, somehow survived the massive battle there, and they became good Daleks, maybe? And they called him, but we've never had any indication in the rest of Doctor Who that that ever happened. So, you know. But that was the only way I could rationalize this. Is it was it but is that maybe that would explain it? But yeah, since when would the Daleks care about any crime the Master had committed? Um, then, since when do they grant last requests? What are they? What is this? The 1800s? They have to grant his last request, and they consider the Doctor to be their greatest enemy. And every time they see him, they try to exterminate him on sight unless he pulls something out, unless he pulls something to make them back off. So they just let the Doctor just come to Skyro and pick up the Master's remains because they didn't want to be rude to the guy they were exterminating? Oh my. It makes no sense. If you don't know the lore, you're confused, and if you know the lore, you're even more confused. But then the movie starts, and it gets and here's the thing. It gets a lot of things right. For instance, I really like the blue version of the Jon Pertwee Doctor Who logo that they used in this movie. And it became the default Doctor Who logo on merchandise until the series came back in 2005. So, good job there. They also created my absolute favorite version of the TARDIS console room, bar none. Again, shame it's only seen in this one movie. And I like that they brought back Sylvester McCoy. It's nice. It's really nice seeing him, and he seems really comfortable in the role. My only problem with it is that it slows everything down plot-wise. And then Paul McGann's plot, the actual plot of the movie and Paul McGann's time in it seems way cut short. Now, when I first watched this, I absolutely hated the basic premise of this movie was that the Master turns into some sort of snake creature. His remains turn into some sort of snake creature. He sabotages the TARDIS, causes it to crash land in San Francisco, 1999, because, of course, this was the mid-90s, so anything science fiction or fantasy related had to take place on December 31st, 1999, because everybody was obsessed with the millennium changing over. Even though the millennium didn't actually change over until until the new year of 2000 to 2001. But I digress. Anyway, and he then the Doctor materializes in the middle of a war between two Chinese gangs, gets shot, which feels really out of place for the Seventh Doctor. The Seventh Doctor just walking out into a hail of gunfire without looking around on the scanner to see what was going on seems really out of place, since if there's one Doctor that always planned ahead and always seemed to be expecting the worst and always seemed to be prepared, it was the Seventh Doctor. But they needed to get him out of the way, which is why I kind of prefer the way the series dealt with just introducing the Doctor to a new audience in 2005, where they just have the Doctor show up and be the Doctor, sort of like, in An Unearthly Child, the original first Doctor Who story. And they sort of hint that he may be newly regenerated, but they don't show the old Doctor. And yes, I would have loved to have seen Paul McGann, but I think for the purposes of pacing and just getting an audience hooked, it kind of makes more sense to just have one actor playing this incredibly alien character than it does to start out with one actor who's doing a good job and the audience might be starting to like, only to then have him be blasted in the face with Uzis or whatever. The one living member of the gang then calls an ambulance, and this really leads to something that I remember watching this with some of my family who has worked on an ambulance, and it just drove him up the wall because this is not how it works in the U.S. and this just screams to me British writer who doesn't actually know how the U.S. healthcare system works. Because Chang Lee, who is the one survivor from his gang, and he sees this old British guy get shot up, calls an ambulance, and then the ambulance tells him that he has to sign to take responsibility for this guy and tell them his name, or they can't take him to a hospital and they won't treat him in the ambulance. This is not how it works. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. Regardless of what you think of the U.S. healthcare system, they deal with John Does all the time. They don't... Yeah, they're not just going to leave a guy... An ambulance isn't just going to leave a guy to bleed to death because some random stranger who found him won't sign up to take financial responsibility. Sorry, not going to happen. That was insane. And then the snake thing that the Master turned into that sabotaged the TARDIS, it then takes over the body of one of the ambulance attendants, Eric Roberts. And again, back in the day, a lot of us thought Eric Roberts was absolutely the worst interpretation of the Master. Especially as he's not a British actor. I mean, it just felt wrong to have the Master not played by somebody British. However, upon rewatching this, and by the way, this is the first time I've rewatched this thing in like 20 years, I have to say, I've considerably softened on him, and I think he was actually trying. He actually seems to be trying to bring some gravitas and just, and a sense of menace to it. And he does seem to have had a good time playing the role. And what's more, while I thought his interpretation was a little too over the top at the time, I have to say, maybe it's just because I had to suffer through John Sim and his version of the Master, who was a Mexican jumping bean hopped up on cocaine. But it's not that bad. It's not that bad anymore. In fact, he seems kind of restrained compared to John Sim. He seems kind of restrained and menacing compared to that. And so, I'm going to change what I was saying at the time and say, you know what? Eric Roberts was okay with the Master. If this had gone to series, I think he would have found his footing. You know how, sort of like how John Delancey was sort of way too over the top the first couple of times he appeared as Q in Star Trek, but then in Q Who, he really found his footing and became a character that ended up being a good foil for Jean-Luc Picard. I think that's what would have happened if this had gone to series. So the doctor's taken to the hospital. A surgeon named Grace Jones is called in, but then Dr. Grace Holloway, is called in to perform surgery on him since he was shot in the heart. However, she gets lost in his alien heart, and he dies on the operating table, and then he regenerates in the morgue. But because of the knockout gas, because of the knockout stuff that they give you at the hospital, he can't remember who he is, so he's just this weirdo wandering around in somebody's Wild Bill Hitchcock costume. And this is another thing that just feels weird, is the Doctor gets his stuff because somebody had a Wild Bill Hitchcock costume sitting in the hospital for the New Year's Eve party. And as somebody who was around back then, I can't remember anybody ever wearing any adults anyway ever wearing costumes at this point to New Year's parties. So that seems kind of strange. And then and but eventually he befriends Grace and convinces her that he's a time traveler when he regains his memory, and this leads to what is the most contentious issue of this at the time, which was it's the first time the Doctor kisses a companion, and yes, it feels weird then, and it still feels weird now, especially as it just comes out of nowhere. And it seems to have been a mandate from Fox to try and make the Doctor more of a romantic lead, because I think if this went to series, they wanted another will they, won't they style, Fox Mulder and Dana Scully dynamic like they had in the X-Files. Again, that was propelling some of the X-Files popularity. Will they or won't they scenarios between two attractive leads will always lead to will always help ratings on TV. That's just part of human nature. Meanwhile, the Master has tricked Chang Li into helping him get into the TARDIS, since Chang Li had the TARDIS key. Never mind that it's been established for a long time that the TARDIS key will only work for the Doctor and his companions. Never mind that. We're just going to forget about that. And then to open the TARDIS's link to the Eye of Harmony, because the Master wants to use it to help him steal the Doctor's remaining regenerations, because being stuck in this human body is not his idea of a good time. And the one thing that I'll say is that, again, at the time I was really mad about the whole Master becoming a snake monster thing and all this. But nowadays, thinking about it, I'm willing to buy that maybe the Master had done something to himself on an alien planet, or found some ancient secret or something to learn how to do all this. That's okay. It's now okay with me. It doesn't bug me the way that it did way back in the day. But then then we get what I would say was the worst retcon in Doctor Who history, and something that all future Doctor Who media just ignored. That is, Lee is the only one who's able to open the Eye of Harmony right now, and the Master needs him because it uses an eye lock, and it will only unlock for human eyes because the Doctor is half human on his mother's side. Baloney. 100% pure balonium. But I would say this was the worst retcon. But then I read a plot synopsis of The Empty Child, and, well, let's just say this doesn't feel nearly as much of a betrayal as that. So, I guess good on them for not being the absolute worst retcon in Doctor Who history. Oh, and don't even get me started on Longbarrow. I hate anything that takes away from the Doctor just being an average Time Lord. To me, that was the appeal of the character from when I first started watching William Hartnell episodes on PBS, was that he was supposed to be, yes, he seems extraordinary to us, but he's supposed to be pretty much average and pretty well beneath notice with his own people. To me, that was the heart of the appeal of the character to me, was the idea that he had to go through Time Lord High School twice, and he just barely passed on the second attempt. He just barely got his equivalent of a high school diploma on his second attempt. And he just took a broken down TARDIS that was due to be put away, and that was due to be scrapped. And his only motivation was just that he wanted to see more of the universe. And he wanted to actually interact with people, which the Time Lords wouldn't allow. And Longborough, all these things, Longborough, this half-human thing, and the empty child, they all take away from that. Take away everything else people complain about those retcons, and I can take it or leave it. But by making the Doctor more than just an average Time Lord, that just really doesn't sit well with me. So anyway, by having the Eye of Harmony open, it's the Eye of Harmony is a link to a black hole back on Gallifrey, so that's going to pull the entire Earth inside out into the thing. The molecular structure of the Earth is breaking down. The Doctor needs part of an atomic clock, so to in order to fix the TARDIS, so he can close the Eye of Harmony and travel back to before the Eye of Harmony was open, so it was never open, so the breakdown of the Earth's atomic structure doesn't go on. So there's a pretty exciting and well done chase on a motorcycle where the Master is chasing the Doctor and Grace, and one of the things I like is how they juxtapose things. Is the Doctor has his own companion and the Master has his own companion, and anyway, the Doctor gets his atomic clock piece, and the Master does something ridiculous. He kills people by spitting some sort of goo on them. This is something that I can't make heads or tails of because he's just inside a normal human body. They never explain how he does this. It's like he's a xenomorph from Alien or something, and it's never explained. And then, so there's of course an exciting showdown in the TARDIS, and then the Doctor and then the Master is seemingly killed, and the Earth is saved, and the Doctor says goodbye right at the stroke of midnight as the fireworks are going off. And I assume that if this had gone to series, Grace and Chang Li would have been traveling with the Doctor, which I kind of liked them as companions. I'll be honest. This time around, I kind of like them, and I think they would have found their footing. But yeah, so that's how it plays out. Now, here's what I think of it. There are so many awkward moments in this. I think this was the children of two parents who were fighting. I feel like the writers had one set of notes of things they had to include from Fox and another set of notes of things they had to include from the BBC. And I think between those two things, the writer just wasn't given a fair shot. So I don't blame the writer of this because I think anybody would have struggled with all this. It just becomes a bit of a mess, as there are some moments that are clearly designed for US television, some that are designed for British television, and I have to wonder if the half-human thing was a note from Fox to try and make the Doctor more like Mr. Spock or something. But anyway, as it stands, this is an odd duck that stands awkwardly between the classic Doctor Who series and the revival in 2005. And it tries to serve two masters and really satisfies neither. However, I will say, it was an enjoyable 90 minutes. I didn't hate it the way that I did originally. Now it just stands up as I think what caused a lot of us to hate it at the time was that this felt like, at the time, our last shot at getting Doctor Who back on the screen, and it failed so miserably. So it seemed a lot gloomier back then than it does now. Now it's just a somewhat awkward 90 minutes that came between the two runs of the show. And it help, and it helps now that Paul McGann is what I think one of the best doctors there was, and he was criminally underserved. And he was criminally underserved by this being his only appearance. So that helps. And I just think this could have worked out so much better, but it just didn't. But here's the thing. In my experience, most science fiction shows do have awkward pilot episodes. Just look at Star Trek, where it took 2, Star Trek The Next Generation, Stargate SG-1. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5. I could go on and on. Even Doctor Who, after An Unearthly Child, once you get to the caveman bits of that story, after the initial episode, its first story is kind of awkward. So, I don't think this means necessarily that the show, if it had come out of this pilot movie, would have been terrible. I think there is a chance that the writers could have found their feet, just like any other science fiction show, and most of the time it's normally near the end of the first season that they really find their feet and start making something really good. So, who knows what the potential of this could have been. Grace and Chang Li, I think they would have made good companions, and they seem to have good chemistry with Paul McGann, so I think that would have been fun to watch. But as it stands, it's not the worst, but it's not the best. I'd say rather than being the worst thing ever produced by Doctor Who, it's really just a right down the middle 5. And now that we're somewhat removed, it can still be enjoyed on its own, and since it is the only full television story for Paul McGann, I can't see a reason not to watch it. If nothing else, if you've only ever heard his audios or seen him in his brief appearance during the 50th anniversary, this will give you some idea of how he would have actually played the Doctor on screen. So it's worth it for that, and for seeing the best TARDIS console room ever. So, yeah, I was rather pleasantly surprised. Not pleasantly surprised enough to call this really good, but I feel like the writers and the director and the producers were given an impossible task, and they did the best that could be done under those circumstances, so I'm not being as harsh of it. This is a 5 out of 10. Check it out if you want to see an interesting piece of Doctor Who history that's been largely forgotten in the succeeding years. Well, anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.
There's